to do things the correct way.
Have we ever prepped for anything?
No, but when you're leading, when you're having to lead things, it scares me to death. Like when you know what's going on and us two don't, like it's never going to be well.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
And we are talking about liquor stores again. So welcome to Liquor Stores 201. Because Dan said we couldn't do 102.
That's dumb. You got to progress our listeners' education.
Yeah.
Like you could stay in the 100 class levels forever like you did, but...
So yeah, we're going to do a bit deeper of a dive. And we got some great comments from Patrick S. on YouTube. So thank you for submitting those.
Hey, thanks for watching on YouTube too.
Yeah, Anthony. Yeah, thanks for watching on YouTube.
We got some other comments too,
20
didn't we?
people.
Yeah, Jake's already not doing his job right.
No, it was the same guy who left both comments, but
okay.
I'm glad he left them because he brought
and they were good comments too. So
yeah,
we appreciate the feedback.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start with some like rapid fire questions that were brought up. So just some more like statistical kind of things. So what are your top, or like of all the categories of beer, wine, spirits that you sell, what's the ranking on each category in terms of sales volume?
So it's changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years. You also got to remember with a lot of these questions, we are a little bit of an outlier because we do work with several whiskey clubs. And I think we have a huge whiskey selection and that draws a lot of people in. And we do have a lot of people that shop online and have started to order shipping for spirits. So I think 10 years ago, it was extremely heavy on wine, and then spirits was a little bit behind the wine. We probably sold 2 times more wine than we did spirits 10 years ago. It was that dominant. And then vodka was the number one selling spirit up until probably 10 years ago. And that's dramatically shifted because now whiskey, bourbon, American whiskey specifically, is our number one selling spirit. And tequila is actually pretty close behind. But now we're about even. I think wine still outsells spirits a little bit. But it's pretty close. There are certain months where we sell more spirits, certain months where we sell more wine. And I think a lot of that also has to do with, somebody can walk in the store and walk out with 12 to 24 bottles of wine easily. Wine drinkers, have a cellar. They have, they're opening 2-3 bottles of wine in a night, especially if they're having a dinner. And you're not going through 2-3 bottles of spirits in a night.
Right.
So like you're not lame, you are.
Yeah. Well, maybe Dan out in the boondocks got nothing else to do. Just sitting back there drinking his bourbon. But yeah, I mean, for the average person, it's pretty easy for the average wine drinker, it's pretty easy to walk out with 24 to 36 bottles and then come back in a few weeks because you need to replenish that.
Yeah, like you have a pretty... I talked to Dan, your wine guy, quite a bit while I'm waiting for master classes to start. And like you guys have a pretty curated wine selection.
Very
space limitations, and you guys seem to be very particular about what you're putting out there.
Yeah, we have I would say our whole entire selection in the store is very curated. we literally taste everything before it comes into the store. I don't want to sound like an alcoholic, but like during the day when reps are coming in, we're tasting and spitting, but we taste everything before it comes in. Like we're making sure it's something that we can stand behind and something that we can feel good about promoting to our customers. Obviously, you're going to get certain people that ask for certain wines or certain spirits, and if they shop with us regularly, that's the other part of the inventory is just requests and stuff that people are asking for. But other than that, we will not take a new product in unless we have people asking for it or unless we've tasted it and have approved it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the wine selection, my brother handles all the wine, and maybe that's like a guest appearance podcast down the road to get him on here. But he handles all the wine, I handle all the beer, and then we both kind of handle spirits. So we kind of meet right in the middle. The spirits are in the middle of the store. That's what we like to say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he does a really good job. He before he started working at the store, he knew how much I was into beer and spirits. And so he signed up for a couple wine internships in college and just really studied up and got interested in wine. So he does a really good job picking our wine selection and making sure we have the right things for the right customers.
Nice. And I'm a little surprised that beer sounds like it's dead last in
Beer's
sales.
Beer's dead last. It's always been dead last. I mean, it's just less expensive,
Oh, in dollars. Yeah.
I'm talking dollars. Yeah. So like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if we're talking volume and we're talking ounces, obviously beer is going to dominate the other two. But dollar wise, beer is far behind spirits and wine.
Well, and the other thing you got to think of too, Jake, with beer is you can, like, if you want to get a case of just your normal cheap American light beer, you're going to go to the closest place that sells it, because if a gas station sells it for 50 cents more and they sell it at Gold Eagle and it's right around the corner from your house, you're just going to get it from the closest, easiest place because the prices are all right the same. There's a lot more competition for that style of thing. So, where if you're looking for a specific type of spirit, a specific wine, a good bourbon, a good wine, stuff like that, you're going to go to
It's
more
like
of a liquor store.
Like if I had to guess, probably within your beer sales, your craft beer is probably higher than the domestic, like, off the shelf kind of normal stuff, right? Or no?
No, I mean our top
okay.
like 4 or 5 selling beers are all domestics. But you got to also think about it this way: there's 1,000 craft breweries, so they're all fighting for the craft segment. And the person that comes in to buy craft is going to buy craft, and the person that comes in to buy domestic is going to buy domestic.
That's
so
true.
there's
And when you buy craft, you're going to buy a 6-pack. When you buy domestic, you're going to buy an 18-pack.
yeah,
of tall boys.
18, 24 pack. And yeah, there's a lot of people that don't drink craft, and they'll come in every 2-3 days and get their 24 pack of Modelo or Miller Lite. So Modelo is our number one selling beer, followed by Corona, followed by Miller Lite, Coors Light. Those are definitely our top 4. And then I think I haven't done this report in a year, but it used to be Zombie Dust. Right behind those was our next bestseller. Wow. And I think it still is. A lot of people have said like, "Oh, Zombie Dust has died," but no, it hasn't. Like we still move through a lot of Zombie Dust, at least probably 5-10 cases a week.
Wow.
Hot take: that's one of my least favorite 3 Floyds.
I like it, but it's not like if I sit there and drink 4 or 5 of them, then I start to not like it.
I like my Space Station.
Ooh, so bitter, and I don't even know if they're making that anymore.
I haven't seen it
at least not for distribution. Yeah, we haven't gotten that in a while. But yeah, Zombie Dust is I think it's a really good beer, but it's not something you can just sit there and pound all day. If I'm out to dinner and they have it on tap, I'll definitely go for it. But Gumball Head too. We still sell a lot of Gumball Head.
Yeah, Gumball Head's good.
And then behind those, Tighthead,
Yeah, just makes
which
sense.
is,
They're local.
yeah, I mean, local. I don't know. A lot of
And
people
really
think,
good.
yeah, and great price point. All their 4 packs, 16-ounce 4 packs are $10. It's just good, clean beer. So yeah, Free Floyds and Tighthead are two dominating craft breweries for us, and Phase Three obviously in there now. Hot Butcher, those are probably the big four with craft beer.
Yeah. Okay. Um, how does a store like Gold Eagle differentiate itself from the big box or chain stores? I think we all know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty, I don't know, that's a pretty easy question that we could talk about for a long time. But for starters, we're family owned since 1933. We got the third liquor license that Chicago issued after Prohibition, which a lot of people still don't know that, but it's a really cool fact.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
And if you're into spirits and barrel picks, we, just like our whole selection, we really care about any barrel pick that we put our name on. I'm not going to throw. I thought about this episode. I don't want to throw other stores under the bus, but it's alarming how many times reps have come in and said, "Hey, this box store, this chain store, doesn't want to taste these single barrel samples. They just said to send any barrel that we want, and they'll ask me, do you care to taste them and get first dibs before they get their barrel?"
Mm-hmm.
That happens quite a lot. Like, there's a lot of the big stores that are around our area. They don't even care to taste the barrel samples. They just want the barrels because they know it's going to sell. And the other part of that too is when they do taste, a lot of those big box stores are going to Knob Creek, for example, and picking 10 barrels at a time and splitting it between all their stores.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not looking for the cream of the crop best barrel. They know that they're going to sell those 10 barrels of Knob Creek. So they're just going in like, okay, it's good. It's good. This one's good. That one's good. Like, we are going in and we're picking the absolute best. And if we don't find one that blows us away that we really love, we're not going to pick. We pride ourselves in how many barrels we turn down over how many barrels we pick. I think we average about 50 or 60 barrel picks a year, but we turned down over 450 barrel samples last year.
Mm-hmm.
So we're tasting quite a lot more than what we're picking.
Well, and not only is it just the wanting to have the best you guys do, it's you have to move a full barrel. You can move a case or two of bad whiskey when it's split up among a lot of stores.
Right.
You can't. It's not easy to move a barrel of bad whiskey in one store.
Yeah, so it's got to be good because otherwise we're going to get stuck with it. We're going to sit on it for a while. And, not going into barrel picks and just talking overall the store for the average consumer, I think we excel in personal service, customer service. When you come into Gold Eagle, you know who's going to be there. You know the employees. We treat our employees like family. It's the same people that are working there all the time. What's amazing to me is like most of our employees have worked at the store longer than I have, which is, I think, shows like they're happy where they're at. And they have good relationships with the customers, which is very important. And we take pride in like our personal customer service and actually caring about what we're recommending to the customers. Where when you walk into a big box chain store, sure, you might find someone who's been at that store for 6-7 years, but you never know who you're going to get. There's always going to be somebody new working, and most of those, not all of them, but most of those people aren't really going to care if you come back or not. Like, our goal is we want you to come back and shop with us again. So if we recommend something that you don't love, we want to hear about it, and we want to hear, what you didn't like about it and how we can improve on that recommendation the next time.
Yeah, I will say I haven't gotten a recommendation from someone at Gold Eagle that I was like disappointed with. There's been a lot, particularly on wine, because I don't know anything about it. But if anybody wants to listen to a more in-depth episode about barrel picks, episode 39 of Bourbon Matters is
Holy
us
cow.
three doing a Knob Creek barrel pick, where we actually talk about how, you know, we're turning down some one of them was a Booker's barrel. Yeah, so that's an interesting episode if you want to learn more about like the barrel picking type thing.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of times where we'll get like 4 samples from a distillery and we'll say, you know, sorry, but we just didn't love any of these.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to send us more, that's cool. If not, we get it. And I think a lot of stores have a hard time because you don't want to ruin that relationship with the distillery. And I think a lot of stores have a hard time saying no when they get samples in front of them. Mm-hmm. Especially because you're tasting 4 of the same thing. So if you have one that you like better than the other 3, you're going to go with it. But for us, if it doesn't blow us away, if we don't really love it, then we're not going to pick it.
Yeah. The past few amongst the past few master classes, I've been fortunate enough to try a couple samples with you that the reps have brought in, and on all of them I've been like, wow, this is really good, and you're like, no.
Not good enough. It's really good.
Wait, are you saying your palate isn't great and you like bad whiskey and
no,
not you, Jake.
I know.
Jake R in the middle is the one with the awful
saying,
palate.
Like, I've had samples where I'm like, okay, this is good. But is it good enough for us to buy 200 bottles of it and put our name on the bottle and then have to sell those 200 bottles? That's another level of good that it needs to be.
Well, and we have 2 really good comparisons that we've done with each other with our Whiskey Acres picks. Was the first one with Toasted Oak.
Yeah.
At first, you didn't like or you weren't completely sold on it. We tried at different proof points and you liked it. And then the one that will become... Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say with the Toasted Oak, like it probably would have sold a lot quicker if we would have gone with the barrel proof because it was 132 proof. It was toasted barrel. If we said that, I think initially people would have just bought it. But that's not what we want. That's not what we're about. So that's why we decided to proof that down and try it at different proof points. Because we want you to walk away extremely satisfied anytime you grab something that says Gold Eagle on it.
Yeah, and this last time for the one that'll be coming out soon, I just brought you a random sample of a barrel that was unique, just because we were doing that top secret blind, and you took a sip of it or tried it a couple times and said, "Yeah, I'll take it." But
yeah,
it wasn't a compare. It wasn't comparing against anything else. It was more of a, here's a sample. Do you like this good enough to make this a barrel pick? And it went through. So
I think my face after I tasted that sample said it all.
And it was great because you had no idea what it was either.
Yeah, you just poured something for me. I'm like, oh, whoa.
Didn't tell you anything about it. And it's unique, but didn't tell you anything about it. So
yeah, the only bad part about that was we had to look at Dan's shit-eating grin for a long time afterwards. But yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Almost like I know what good barrels to pick are.
On top of that, personal service, caring so much about the barrel picks, family owned since 1933. You can also toss in that we have a tasting bar. You can come in and taste. We have 200 plus open bottles at the bar. We've got an online store. Our website and our app is fully shoppable. I know one other big box store has that, but none of the other ones do. And there's obviously a few smaller ones that do have that, but I think that's really helpful to the customer. So you don't have to drop everything and drive in whenever we release something or get something new in. You can just go right on your phone and purchase it. And that was a lot of work to set all that up. But thankfully during COVID, I had a lot of time to sit at home on my computer and do that.
Yeah.
but I think
Yeah,
that's really convenient and kind of just sets us apart even more.
Yeah, it's one of the best features I think of the store, for sure. I mean, you guys almost have like every new thing that you release available too, which is really nice for the
I mean,
consumer.
yeah, everything. We try to do everything. The only time we don't is the occasional release where we just are happy to offer our local customers something, because the local customers are the ones that are coming in on their way home from work 3-4 times a week, grabbing a pint at the bar, grabbing their beer. So we try to keep some things local in Libertyville, but other than that, most 99.9% of things are right online. So it's just first come first serve. Wherever you are, you can go on and secure it.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of customer service, I want to pivot a little bit into allocations and how customer service kind of relates to that. So I think everyone has experienced the big box allocation uh, game that you kind of have to play, um, and the small liquor store kind of game that you have to play with allocations. Um, we've talked about this before, but how do you deal with people that are hunting for allocated whiskey? Is it disruptive to your business to any degree? And then how do you guys actually handle allocated releases?
Is your wife okay? It
She's
sounded
all
like
right.
she might. Okay, it sounded like someone was dying. I wasn't sure whose wife or
This-
fiance that was, but Phil.
this mic is pretty good. I can't believe you picked up on that, but she's all right.
All right, just want to
Um,
make sure.
Yeah, so handling allocations, that's a fully loaded question. I think every store handles it differently. Obviously, there's many different ways you can do it. I mean, first off, the easy answer to this is everything we do is first come, first serve, except for the ultra rare stuff we save for the end of the year, and then we run a customer report. And last year we had 500 bottles set aside, and this is your Pappy Van Winkle line, your antique collection, your Russell's 13, your Parker's Heritage, all your stuff that we really only receive 3 bottles of, 6 bottles of for the whole year. So we had about 500 bottles that we set aside. And then we just ran a customer report through the year. And we went down the list and hit about 200 people until we just ran out of those 500 bottles. And everything is obviously sold at retail price. We don't jack up the price on anything. But there's a lot of ways you can do it. I just think that's the most fair. Reward our customers who shop with us the most throughout the year. And then I think we put plenty of allocated and harder to find bottles up on our social media daily, just first come, first serve. So even if you don't want to be one of our big spenders and make that list, there's still tons of things that you can get your hands on that are hard to find.
Yeah, I've seen stuff sneaking into the Instagram posts lately.
Yeah, and I think that is only going to increase, going forward, as we've talked about this constantly. But as all these big distilleries are ramping up production, we're already starting to see more and more things come in. I mean, Larceny Barrel Proof, Elijah Toasted, just to name two things that 6 months ago would fly off the shelves immediately, are now just sitting on the shelf. So I think as these distilleries ramp up, especially in a couple of years when Buffalo Trace ramps up, there's just going to be a lot more things that are readily available that right now aren't. So there's a lot of cool things you can get your hand on, not to mention barrel picks, which I may be a little biased, but everyone who comes over to my house can see that it's all barrel picks, because that's what I like. That's what I think is the most unique, and that's what I think is the best. And obviously, I'm picking the barrels, so it fits my palate. But just some of the most unique whiskey comes from single barrels, specifically barrel picks.
Mm-hmm. And then like I my only comment to that is I do appreciate Gold Eagle's transparency on that process. I know a lot of like going to the big box store, they'll just lie to you and tell you like, no, we don't have that, like go away, or until you spend whatever threshold of money with them, but then they're like, oh yeah, we got like everything you could ever want in the back.
Yeah. So to kind of maybe elaborate a little more on that, because Patrick's comment mentioned how, 10 years ago, I think 15 years ago, we used to walk in and find Van Winkle on the shelves all the time, which is totally true. My dad tells me all the time about how it used to collect dust and nobody wanted it. And we had the whole antique collection on the shelf and nobody wanted it because it was just too expensive for a bourbon at $80 a bottle. Which now people would pay 10 times that amount. So times have definitely changed. Even when I started working at the store 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we would go in the back and grab a bottle for our good customers that came in because there just wasn't a lot of people asking for these products. There was a small group of people that were after this stuff, that were asking for this stuff. So it was cool to say, yeah, if you want it, like I see your face regularly, I'm going to go grab it for you, which is what a lot of the big box stores still do. But it got to a point with us probably 4 or 5 years ago where we just had to put an end to that, just because there's way too many people that do support us. So the result of that was just do it once a year. Just run a report once a year. That way it's fair to everybody. Doesn't matter, if we like you or if we don't like you. It's all based on how much you support the store, which is what keeps our business going and keeps our employees paid and happy.
Yeah. So that's a good, I think, transition to the next question, which is like, what is the new whiskey customer like today versus a few or several years ago?
I think a lot of it is still the same, but it's that part of it is just new people that are getting into the category. There's still Dan smirking over there, so I want to hear what he's thinking. But there's still a handful of people that they don't care what what barrel pick, what craft distillery you have that you say is really good. They just want Taylor Small Batch, Weller Reserve, Eagle Rare. That's all they care about, and that group of consumer is never going to go away. But the people who actually are drinking and are really kind of invested into this as a hobby will all admit that that stuff is completely overrated, and it's more fun to try and expand your palate on different things, and kind of discover the guys that are a little under the radar.
My smirk was also in kind of line what you were saying, but I just guessed that more of the new people are the younger demographic, so they probably the same thing, just feel more entitled of, hey, I bought a 12-pack of Bud Light last week. You got Taylor for me? I deserve it.
There's still, I mean, there's still people like that will come up with they're like, oh, I just bought, a bottle. You got any Blantons in the back for me? I'm like, no. But yeah, there's still a lot of people, and it's I think that is the trickiest part of the whole, chase or tater chase, whatever you want to call it, is to try and talk to that customer and explain to them that you shouldn't worry too much, or you shouldn't be so invested in trying to find these kind of daily overrated bottles, because they don't want to hear that they're overrated. They don't want to hear that there's better stuff on the shelf, even though people like us who have collections like what's behind you, Jake, know that there's just so much better stuff on the shelf than a lot of these bottles that sell out way too quick, that have no business doing that.
Yeah, get past the FOMO. It's not worth it.
Yeah, that's the hard thing, is to politely explain to them and try and, open their eyes and open their minds to the fact that there is better things out there, and this is a great time to just try other things and expand your palate, expand your whiskey knowledge, because quote me on this again and again and again, but 5 to 10 years from now, all of that Buffalo Trace stuff is going to be sitting on the shelf. And then will those people still buy it, is the question. Or is there going to be something new that's hard to find that they're going to go for, and they're not going to care about Blanton's and E.H. Taylor anymore because they're just on the shelf all the time?
It'll be the Weller Millennium.
Yeah.
So, and to be fair on those people, are some of the newer people that are into it and are looking for the Tater bottles. Like, some of the reason are these people that are new into it remember whiskey as Jack Daniels from college, and they went to one of their friends' house who has a collection, and they've heard about Blanton's. They tried it, and they're comparing that Blanton's, which is the first good produced whiskey they've had since Jack Daniels in college 15 years ago, maybe, and it tastes like it's the best whiskey in the world. So I can see that
totally
as well.
Yeah,
it's not all just people hearsay. There's a lot of that goes on of when you're around friends that have good collections and you try a good whiskey for the first time, you think it's the best thing ever because you have very little to compare it to. And that's just something that comes with age.
For sure.
And also proof point too, like those are all around 90-ish proof. So when you're just getting into sipping whiskey, you try a Blanton's at 93 proof, it's extremely smooth. And you don't realize the single barrel factor, that not every bottle is going to taste the same. Like, sure, you can find a really good Blanton's out there, but for me, it's like McKenna. It's like 1 in 10 chance that you're going to find a good one. And the other ones are just going to be very mediocre and almost like, I don't even want to drink that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, Dan. Like, for once in your life.
Yeah, once on this show.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, there definitely is that factor of like, holy crap! Like, I didn't know whiskey could actually taste that good. But like, I mean, that's why I think like there's so many resources now, like this show, for people that are trying to get into whiskey, that'll tell you right off the bat, like, don't waste your time chasing that stuff. There's things just as good, like, readily available, and then one day you'll get a Taylor and it'll be like, oh, okay, this is just like everything else I've had. So it's not as,
or one day you'll go to a
deal.
blind tasting and then your eyes will open up and you'll be enlightened to, oh wow, that bottle I thought was the best thing I ever had, I just preferred this Wild Turkey 101 over that.
Right. Yeah. All right. So last question before we get into what's probably going to be the second half of the show. Patrick asked, can customers help with barrel picks, or do they? The answer would be yes, in a variety of different ways. I know you guys have at least 2 different whiskey clubs that you guys are affiliated with. So you're able to join those clubs, and sometimes you can get your way into a barrel pick.
So we work with a couple whiskey clubs. Lake County Whiskey Club and Adventures Club are probably the big 2. Swan Club, shout out to them. They're kind of a local, more niche club in Libertyville. But those guys source their own barrels, and they run them through us. So naturally, we kind of also toss them some barrels too. And it's a good relationship that works back and forth. But I mean, Lake County Whiskey Club, every time they do a barrel pick, they pull tickets. And every event that you go to or every bottle you buy, you get a raffle ticket. So every time they go and do a barrel pick, they pull raffle tickets, and whoever's more active in the club has more of a chance to participate in that barrel pick. Outside of whiskey clubs, we've done, I think, 5 different master classes now where we've picked a barrel at the master class, and have allowed 30 40 people to sign up and vote on what barrel we're going to pick for the store. So I think that is a really cool way to do it. But other than that, every single barrel pick we do, we try to get different customers' opinions on. Now, I will say that's a little tricky because a lot of times we're getting sent really small samples, or we're going to the distillery. So, we've taken customers with, and that's kind of just something you need to express that you're really interested in doing. And the timing needs to work out, because a lot of times barrel picks aren't as easy or as planned as you might think. Sometimes reps will just show up at the bar and say, hey, I got something I really want you to try. And if there's customers sitting at the bar, I'll invite them to come over and taste the barrel samples. So, yes, ultimately, it is the staff, myself, and my brother who are picking the barrels, but we love getting customers involved whenever we can. But like I said, it usually is not as easy as it sounds, because the samples are typically small, and it's kind of like just timing. If you're in the store at the time that we're doing a pick, you're going to be invited to come and taste.
Yeah. All right. Our next topic that I'm pretty sure is going to be the rest of the episode. How is the market changing? So we've talked about this in entire episodes and in bits of episodes. But I think, we're kind of due for a little touch point on this again this year, going into the second half of the year, or the wind down of the year at this point.
Final third of the year.
Yeah. So we'll get to Dan's perspective.
I was going to say, let's hear Dan's first.
Oh, okay. We can hear Dan's first. And then I want to hear what
I've been doing a lot of talking. Let's hear what Dan wants to say or has to say about this.
Dan.
And again, Dan, I'm this isn't going to be a head-to-head disagree debate, because I do realize because we are a little bit of an outlier when it comes to these
is an outlier,
stats.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's why it's tough, because I've talked to you before about some, just as I was doing this research, getting some information from you, and your store is a little tougher because, one, you are in a very great location with a lot of people not too far from you that have higher AGI than most other people, or not AGI, average household income, which helps. You have a very large and loyal following with people that have been going to your store for decades. So that helps you guys out as well too.
And the whiskey clubs help too.
Whiskey clubs help a lot too. Mm-hmm. And all the barrel picks help a lot.
And
too.
the events, the master classes.
Yep.
The online stores. Do we see a trend here? Like, we're very active and we care a lot.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. In any market, you can always find people that are doing well above other places. You'll always find those outliers, people that are doing great business. So,
So Dan, let's hear your
compliment. So
you did a lot of research.
Yeah, I did a research project this spring that we want to start looking to at the distillery in terms of what the market was showing, because at the time we were still debating if we were going to add a second still and start increasing production, or what we were going to do. And since I had surgery and couldn't do a lot, I was tasked with doing a lot of research. And I pulled up the project because I haven't looked at it since I presented it 3 months ago. It was 70 slides long at the end of it, all said and done. So this will be a super condensed version about just the most important things. So I'm going to talk about volume of basically volume of bottles sold, and not revenue. Either way, it's pretty much flatlined in 23 from 2022 to 2023. The things that are interesting to watch, and what I'm going to talk about too, is kind of things that we've been hearing this year from what our distributors saying and what we've heard from other distilleries too, is now some of the stuff in here is even changing more. So when we look at sales growth, when you go back 10 years ago in 2012, that was the first time that there was over 5% growth from the previous year in terms of case sales. And since 2012, it's never been less than 5% growth yearly from previous year to the next year in terms of cases sold.
In
and it's
bourbon specifically or whiskey?
Whiskey.
Okay.
American whiskey. This is all American whiskey. And we've seen that. And in 2021, it grew by 4.5%. 2022, it grew by 5%. And 2023, it actually was 0.4% down in terms of number of case sales, which is the first time in a long time since 2009 when it dropped 0.05% in terms of case sales.
Which is understandable.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming out of a major recession. So
yeah. So and it was down, like, honestly, when I'm looking at the numbers in terms of thousands of 9-liter cases, we're talking less than like 10,000 cases across the entire U.S. So very small number wise. So in terms of volume in 2023, it basically lost 0.4% from the previous year. So fairly flat. Now, when you break down those categories, they have it as basically like a value category, which is your bottom shelf, figure less than $25 for a bottle of whiskey. Then you have your second tier, which is basically up to like the 25 to 55 range. Your third tier, which goes up to $100. Then your fourth tier, which is any bottles that are over $100. Basically, when we look back over 20 years, there has been very little growth of your bottom shelf cheap whiskeys. That market hasn't really changed at all.
Which makes sense.
The second level, which is your mid tier, which is, a lot of the $30, $40 whiskey bottles, those grew a little bit, but started falling off a couple of years ago. Where the main growth of the whiskey industry came from is from the super premium and the high end premium. So your $160 bottles to well over 100 were growing like crazy. And that's where a lot of the growth came from. And the reason I want to talk about case sales and volume of whiskey versus revenue is because even though the case sales were down in 2023, the revenue was up a little bit, but mainly driven by the fact of price increases, as well as the fact that a lot of the growth came from the very expensive bottles. And even when we look back at the last 2 years, that second level, that $30, $40 bottle range, in 2022, it shrunk by 1.2%. And then last year, it shrunk by 16%. In 2022, the $60 to $100 bottles grew about the same, about 6.5% each year. But then your super premium, your very expensive bottles, saw 15% growth in 2022 and only 4% growth in 2023. So what we're starting to see is a shift back now, and kind of what I've been hearing based off of distributors, based off of other distillers we talked to, is now the shift is more people are going towards the more value whiskey over the high-end premium. And I'll talk about it later when we talk about the whiskey glut issue that I sent you guys the information on. Mm-hmm. There's a brand I've heard of that's kind of freaking out a little bit that falls into two categories of one, whiskey's not selling great, and two, issues that could happen because of a whiskey glut. But what we've been seeing on our end, what our distributors have been telling us, and they even sell for one of the big six, and they said one of the big six they sell for is down quite a bit this year. Is we are seeing kind of that. I think we had the discussion about it a while ago when we said, has whiskey peaked? We were all kind of different sides. Where I said I think it's peaked and it's going to plateau. We're kind of seeing that just kind of holding steady a little bit. Now, is it because people aren't spending as much money? That's part of it. However, tequila sales have continued to increase, but even this year, they're saying that tequila might be flat. Other indicators for what's going on in 2024, it's hard to get a lot of accurate information that's up to date. You have to wait usually to the end of the year for that. But even Brown-Forman predicted a softer year this year than last year, and they've even dropped it by 1% on top of that since their couple financial reports have come out for them. So I think when we look at market trends, I think not only are we seeing a stoppage in growth of whiskey, I think we're going to see a change in very expensive bottles, not necessarily being the most sought after outside of your BTAC, all that stuff's going to sell. But like, for example, Kentucky Owl, things like that sit on the shelf at over $100, I think are going to really start to have a problem in 2024 and beyond.
You mean Kentucky Owl is not worth $300, $400 a bottle?
No.
So let me ask, do you think this is and you kind of touched on that it sounds like you don't think this is specific to whiskey. It seems to be a overall market trend.
Oh, the only spirit that had a growth in sales last year was tequila. Every other, your Scotch, your Irish whiskey, your vodkas, they were all down.
Okay.
Your gins, rums were all down in sales.
Jump in here for a second. I think from my point of view and what I'm seeing, I think we're seeing a market correction. I still don't think we've hit the peak. I think we've just kind of corrected the boom that happened with COVID.
Yep.
When
return
COVID
to normalcy
hit,
is what the big words are that they constantly use.
Just back to normal life. When COVID hit, people did not go out. They saved a lot of money, and a lot of people built massive whiskey collections or home bars because they were home all the time and they had small gatherings within their neighborhood, and they just weren't drinking it as much, and sharing as much because the gatherings were smaller. So I think right now we're seeing a little bit of a correction, and I've heard it. I said this a couple episodes before, but I've heard from a lot of people that have said, "Oh, I have 400 bottles at home. I'm never going to drink it all, so I'm just getting really picky on what I'm buying." And actually, most of those people have said like they're into the higher end bottles, but not like your Kentucky Owls. Like they need to taste them before they buy them. They need to taste like a $300 bottle if they're going to spend that. I think,
which tracks with what Dan was saying.
Yeah, the $60 to $100 range is still growing, and it's the one that's growing the most year to year.
Yeah,
but the value, the premium fell quite a bit, and the very expensive stuff had a big fall from grace by dropping over 11% in growth.
Yeah, so to me, that like macro trend makes a lot of sense. Like a lot of people are going to just skip over that bottom shelf bracket entirely, except for the people that like that's their go-to, like
daily
or monthly or daily
drinkers,
thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then like you'll have people who intro in that like bracket B, and then escalate their buying up to the top bracket, then realize that the value's not there, and then return back down to one of the middle brackets. Like that makes total sense to me.
From my point of view, I think we're seeing a little bit of a correction. I still think we have not seen the peak. I still think it's going to continue to rise. And that's just because there's just more and more people who are getting into the category. We're still seeing new whiskey drinkers come into the store every single week. But with the boom of distilleries and distilleries producing a lot more, especially because, a lot of them started distilling more 4 or 5 years ago. So now we're starting to see the whiskey being ready. There's just a lot more available. I think it's just, they're just taking more of the market share from all of these distilleries. And 5 years from now, when Buffalo Trace has all of their whiskey on the shelf, what's it going to look like? I think a lot of the smaller guys are going to have a really tough time, because people just, the average price, I think, is going to have to go down. People are not going to just keep spending, $80 on a 6-year-old whiskey.
Yeah, and
that's going to be the problem, though, and that's going to kind of lead into the whiskey glut issue we're coming up with. Is there's going to be whiskey sitting longer, and more than likely, when you look at what happened back in the '60s, was you were just using older whiskey in your product, but you couldn't raise the price on it because people weren't buying it.
Yeah,
so you were.
Supply and demand.
Right, and the problem with
this
whiskey,
industry is supply and demand driven.
The problem with whiskey is the longer it sits, the more you lose. So you have less to sell at the same price point, which you should be selling for more. But if the demand isn't there to match the supply, yeah, it's going to be an issue.
But you have to overcome it by volume.
Yeah,
that's the only way.
And this article I sent you guys talking about the next big whiskey glut, which is kind of going back to the '60s. And kind of looking at what happened then and what we're seeing a lot of now. And I can even just kind of, after we talk through this, some of the things that we're seeing within some of the associations we're a part of is when we talk about the next big whiskey glut, we've said that all these people have increased production. We talked about increasing production at Whiskey Acres after my market research, and that's not the only thing that drove it, but we did a lot of other things. And we decided we didn't want to expand production at the time. This information is from a researcher from a company that performs research for big hedge funds. And currently, as of 2022, the inventory is 12.6 million barrels that are aging right now.
In the United States.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
And how has that number changed in the last 10 years?
So it's going to be, this is from 2022. So this is, not too old. What her report,
I'm just curious, 10 years ago, how many barrels were there?
It's got to be way less.
Increase. Way less.
Yeah.
So what her study or what her report is showing is that
we're going to hit a tipping point.
Yeah, over the next 5 years, she sees 3 possible scenarios depending on demand growth. If demand does not increase but remains where it currently is, so if whiskey remains flat over the next 5 years, there will be 1.29 million more barrels available to bottle that are going to outpace demand.
Yeah. Which means price would have to start to drop to compensate.
Not necessarily, though, because you're not going to want to sell more expensive whiskey at a lower price.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you're either going to have to move it sideways or overseas or something if you're sitting on a ton. If demand grows by the historic average of 6% over the last 5 years, then the demand or the supply will outstrip the demand by 780,000 barrels. So that's still, if we continue the growth we've had before this last year, we're still 780,000 barrels in excess. And if growth is 9%, which is one of the higher years that whiskey had over the last 10 years, it'd be still in excess of 480,000 barrels available.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we kind of talked about this last time on our Has Whiskey Peaked episode. I don't know off the top. We don't have the actual hard numbers, but of those 12 million something barrels, I'd be willing to bet that 60% of that is the big 6 in Kentucky, by themselves. It's somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, it's a lot of your bigger distilleries.
Yeah, what that's going to translate to is what Jake said, where all of their products are going to be available all the time unless they do some sort of like manipulation and like keep chopping up into smaller and smaller sub labels or whatever. But
the
I
problem
mean,
is
Weller
every year
tie dye, Weller pink, Weller.
well, there is going to be a
orange.
Weller. There is going to be a Buffalo Trace pink popcorn coming out, but it's going to be way more whiskey that we can even handle.
yeah, well, it to me, it screams the death of craft whiskey.
So that's not the main category of people that she says that this is going to affect first. So her people that she talks about that will be affected the most by the oversupply is going to be your NDPs, which are your non-distilling producers. So your people that are sourcing whiskey and the contract distillers.
Sense. Yeah.
And
which is wild. Just to butt in really quick, which is wild because there's so many contract distillers that are popping up right now.
Yes,
and
that's going to be a problem.
And expanding big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the ones that I said that a distillery that's been mentioned that I've heard from a few different people is starting to not panic, but start to show a lot of concern is Barrel, because they're in that $100 price range, and they're also in this non-distilled producers. It's a blender. Now they're very good, and that's nothing against them. It's very good. They're not distilling their stuff, and there's going to be so much stuff that's similar on the market. And just to go back to the other week, I kind of sent you guys a message of one thing that a couple of things we've seen pop up on a lot of the groups that we're a part of, is we are seeing equipment for sale that is basically new equipment, because you have to order this equipment way in advance. If you want to Vendome still, you're 2 years out right now. We're starting to see some of these distilleries that have gotten in their equipment that they ordered and have now realized that they don't want to install it, and they're putting those up for sale because they don't want to spend the money to increase production. They'd rather try and get their money out of the equipment that they've already purchased. The second thing we're seeing, and I sent it to you guys kind of as a joke, but I know our Gold Eagle Jake was a little bit interested, is there is a distiller that has put up over 1,000 barrels of sourced whiskey that they had already purchased from a couple different places, that they were going to use for their own whiskey. That's all 4 to 5 year old stuff, but they aren't going to be using it anymore. And that's one person that's a blender that already has an excess of 1,000 barrels in 4 to 5 year old, because more than likely their sales aren't growing the way they thought they would continue to grow. And now they have way too much whiskey that's of an age that you could sell.
But to me, that's a marketing problem, and that's a problem on them for not creating the demand for their whiskey.
I would agree. Together good blends. Yeah, because like there's.
If
I don't want to name names, but there's a few like basically independent bottlers would basically be what I would kind of categorize them as, that are just doing exactly what you're talking about, Dan, where they're not even blending, they're just buying barrels, bottling them, and reselling them, and like they're doing really well.
I mean, Rare Character is a prime example of somebody who's new that just jumped in the game, and they've got demand and hype up the wazoo. Everything they put out sells out. Sure, he's got some good connections, and he's getting some older and more Kentucky than anyone else is getting, but I think it just kind of shows that it's not too late to jump in the game if you really, really know what you're doing and you really have a good product to back it up.
Right, but I think that's the problem is a lot of people that started getting into the game late just were getting into the game. The same way with craft brews.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. They're just getting into the game. They're like, oh, whiskey's hot. We're going to start a distillery for fun, and here's some 5-year stuff that hopefully is good, and here's $65 a bottle.
Yeah, but it would be interesting for you, and you don't have to do this, but it'd be interesting to see, like with your store, since you guys move so much whiskey, is looking at how much of like a Jefferson you sold last year compared to this year, or Barrel, or things like that, to see if we're starting to see this on some of the sourced whiskey companies, the bigger sourced whiskey companies, if their volumes are higher or lower.
I do think Barrel has slowed down a lot. From my point of view, like that used to be something that just whatever new release came out would fly out of here, which is
Even just like the normal batches, right? Like,
yeah. Even the normal batches used to just fly out. I mean, it's great whiskey. It's really good whiskey. It's what's surprising is there's still people that come in, and maybe this is just because we have a pretty large selection of barrel craft. Because I do think the whiskey is really good, but there's still people that come in that are like, "Oh, what is this barrel stuff? I've never heard of it." We still get that. So maybe marketing, they're lacking a little bit on the marketing side because.
But I think they also tried to play into the trends that they're seeing with creating the low proof and a cheaper bottle.
Yeah, I think that was just kind of if for the new person who doesn't know about us, they're seeing a tough. It's tough for people to spend $80 on a brand they've never heard of. So to them, it was like, hey, here's a $50 bottle that you can try us out with, and I do think that's a good bottle. But what's also killing them is all their bottles pretty much say 5-year on them, but it's a blend of 5 to 10 plus years usually. So
they shouldn't age state.
They shouldn't age state, and to the average person, it's like, oh, it's a 5-year, but it's $80. I'm not paying for that. But little do they know, there's 5-year, there's 7-year, 8-year, 13-year.
A lot of bottle. Old whiskey in almost all of them. Yeah,
right. Yeah, but I've never had anything bad. That's usually what I tell people is I've never had anything bad from Barrel. Yes, it's pricey. Everything is pricey from them. You won't be disappointed. There might be other whiskeys that you like better at this price point, but you won't be disappointed. They're not going to put out anything bad.
Yeah. No, I've never had any problem with it. And it's just funny because I went to go see our old buddy Sam the other week and was talking to him about some of this stuff and just seeing, and that was not to pile on Barrel, but that was one that he said he's become disappointed in how much it's changed on moving off the shelf at his store. So not to pile on Barrel, but it's just, I mean, we're seeing the secondary market fall too. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, a Pappy 12 might cost you $2,000 on the secondary market, where now you're seeing it for $800.
So I don't follow the secondary market, but I do think
that's part of my research that I had to do.
That could also just be a little bit of an epiphany from the consumer that like it's not worth $2,000.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it, and I also think the COVID boom and just people that had too much money didn't have a way to spend it. So they were just like, I'm going to buy all this rare whiskey, and I don't care what I spend because I'm not traveling every week, flying around in my private jet. So I think a lot of the secondary market fall is because of that. But
yeah. So, anyways, with market trends, that's kind of my research. What my research that I put together was, which was used off of all. I have everything sourced on my spreadsheets, but it was all from government agency things. They were all very or third parties that are their goal is to, like, there was a big thing on craft spirits that I did, and that was all from a body that oversees all the craft spirits in the U.S. So
I should have hit you with a source.
Yeah, I got them on my spreadsheet. If you're looking to know, it was.
You better post all of them, Dan. I expect you to put this in the comments. All of your links to your sources.
Yeah, but no, they were all reputable. I don't know my source pages. Distilled Spirits Council of the U.S. was part of it, and then the other one was the Craft Spirits Data Project. It's something that comes out every year that you can look at, but they're always a year behind. So,
last question. Trump or Kamala, better for whiskey?
No comment. Feel free, Dan, but
I think as a
staying
whole,
far away.
American politics are good for whiskey.
Yeah, I'd agree.
That I can get behind. If they throw another debate, we might see the average sale go up a little bit.
Yeah, what's your spike pre-debate? It's got to be pretty decent, right?
I don't know. After the first debate, the first debate, not the second debate. After the first debate, I'm sure there was a massive spike.
Yeah.
Of like, this is what we're choosing between. Anywho, I think American politics are good for liquor because they all make me want to drink. But yeah. So that's what happens when people ask us questions. We will decide to make our next episode based off of those questions and give some input. I have done a lot of research and study. The other stuff is just Jake talking about his store, and then Jake R. just kind of asks the questions because he's not valuable at all.
I'm the interviewer and moderator.
Moderator.
And I edit every freaking episode, so I carry the group.
And
right?
the dude created the podcast. So.
Co-created.
I had to force you to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, Dan, we're gonna do this fucking podcast. He's like, oh, okay. I'm only available Wednesday nights.
I was at the time.
So the only time I was available. Why it's Wednesday?
Yeah, because I used to distill Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, all until 11 o'clock at night.
I mean, it works for me. We do our master classes on Tuesday, and
it worked for Roberto when Roberto moved, and then he started playing pickleball on Wednesdays.
Yeah,
because he's old. Love Roberto. But anyways, thank you for the questions. If you guys are listening and you want to buy some of the things that Jake talked about, how you can buy online or go to the events to try things and do them blind, or just see his big whiskey selection, Jake, you can tell them where to go.
Yeah, goldeaglewine.com. And I know we, on a recent episode, talked about the master classes. I think that was something we didn't really touch on this podcast, but I think that's a huge thing that differentiates us. I think our tastings and master classes are completely just invaluable when it comes to learning more about distilleries and tasting, trying different things out there that are hard to find or you're just not sure if you want to spend the money on. Master classes are a really, really good asset that we provide. But you can go to goldeaglewine.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. We would love to have you come into the store and ask us any questions, and we'll help you pick out your next good bottle to take home.
And Jake R., before I have you give the plugs, I just want to say one thing because I can think of a question that might come up, especially going back to the first episode when we kind of talked about what all happens between producer and store. We talked about how there's a middleman in there, and then some people might be wondering why we don't have a distributor on the show for a comment. And the answer to that is no one likes the distributor. So there's the answer to your question. But Jake, if they want to go, if they missed the 100 level class for Whiskey Store and whiskey information in general, where can they listen to that episode? Where can they watch us? Where can they give us feedback, comments, make fun of me, whatever they want to do?
So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Find us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters. Also check out my other podcast, Movie Matters, where me and my buddy Kevin talk about movies.
I think I saw Indiana Jones was on there recently.
Yeah, we just did Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was a lot of fun. We're focusing on 80s movies. Originally, we were only going to do like one season of 80s movies, then move on. But there's just so many good ones that we're just going to keep trucking through the 80s until we get tired of it. But yeah,
all right, so sorry, just real quick, we need to get the Adventurers Club guys on an episode here because they are big movie fans.
Oh, really?
Every single barrel pick they do, the sticker is after a movie.
Oh, okay.
And most of them are like movies that I've never heard of because they're from the 80s, and they're like, how have you not heard of this movie? It's a classic. And I'm like, I don't know. I've never seen it. So I
You're
think
the
that would be
perfect listener for Movie Matters.
that would be a really fun collaboration. So we need to make that happen. We can do all three. We can do Movie Matters, Bourbon Matters, and Adventures Club
Yeah,
in
for
one episode.
sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, listen and watch on all the same places. Follow us on Instagram at Movie Matters Podcast.
We're plugging
We
side
post,
projects now.
Yeah, I am doing side projects.
Great, and
We
you're
post every
plugging them?
week what movie we're talking about. So watch the movie, then listen to the podcast episode because they're full of spoilers. We're not like the point of the podcast is to talk about the movie with people who like have watched it or get enjoyment out of discussing it and hearing discussion about it. So. And they're all like 40 years old at this point, so the spoiler window is closed.
Can I plug something since everyone else is plugging random things?
Sure.
Fine.
I have a new side project I'm working on, and it's a podcast called Politicians Matter.
Okay. We'll see you next week.
I'm kidding. They don't. They don't matter. All
All right,
guys.
where can we find? Wait. Ping.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.